And then let's head on over to okay. Seeing my desktop with all kinds of stuff everywhere. Henry, you see my desktop?
Yeah, I see it.
Yeah, just checking. Every now and then something wacky happens. Now, let me find wherever the heck. Okay, and I'll, rather than full screen, I'll just keep this. Everybody see some boots? Give me some thumbs up emojis, you know, so those are always good. Everybody got a notebook and taking notes, right? Careful notes taken today, you'll want to do that, right? Review notes, followed by, well, what do we have to do for our homework? And they're, like I said, this is when dovetailing or collapsing together kind of goes on, so that we can then use the tools that we're learning to make something that we came up on our own. Now, I'll give you the parameters, I'll give you the prompt, but this will be yours, right? So if we had been learning a little bit of how to work with language, which you've been doing your whole life, this would be the first little short story assignment, say, right? Something like that, or your first poem, or, you know, and some kind of analogy like that is apt, because, you know, you can't just learn how to, you know, work with the, if I was your guitar instructor, we could learn chords and we could do, you know, all that kind of stuff, but eventually, and we might do some covers, but eventually it might be like, I want you to write a little song, a little original composition. It's like that, I think. So we began a month ago with a comfortable place to begin with, where we looked at contour, right? We looked at line, and don't forget that. We may have had some projects where, you know, we deliberately didn't do lines, don't do lines, you know, but it's not like as of September 28th or something, you're not allowed to do lines. It's that in that particular moment we were you know, focusing on shape, right? But so we start with lines, and right away we learned some stuff about how to move our eyes around and how to make more sensitive telling, you know, how to do good line work, right? How to do good contour work. We had some exercises, and we really looked at line weight variation, which is a big deal. And we really looked at, you know, we put cross contour in there, which you can see here. This is sort of like a drawing that's a good example of line weight, and it's also got a cross contour sort of thing in it. It's not as, I like to do cross contour examples that are sort of half cross contour, half gesture, you know. This is one of those that's more like line weight variation, cross contour maybe. Yeah, what happens is eventually these examples become, you can see several things going on, I hope. And something may be more telling of one facet or the other, but you begin to see that you know, any number of things could be exemplified by it. Now, this is me just doing a quick sort of, you know, sketchbook thing about that structural line stuff that we did, which was, okay, we've looked close at contour, and we've looked close at slow, sensitive, you know. So what if now we make some sort of stiff light, you know, sort of choppy geometric kinds of things to figure stuff out, and we build those up, and we saw lots of examples of that, you know. And so here I think is a combination of that. I would not, for example, put this up as an example of cross contour, but you can see that it's a great example of the structural lines or the organizational lines, but then also line weight, because the line weights towards the, you know, edges or the corners of the books here. We're sort of talking about that. And then we have the lighter lines and the sort of like straight line thing, like the working out of this kind of stuff. It's something like this: structure, structure, structure. So this is, you know, got some planes, they're called. This is when Shelley got a sticker, because I was talking about, well, what is that, you know, when cross contour is sort of looking a certain way, and it's almost like, you know, we know that we would call the surface of a pear, for example, you know, we don't think of that as very geometric. We think of it as kind of smooth, and it is. But if we have really sensitive structure detecting eyes, we can start breaking stuff up into planes. So over here, I see a structural line exemplar, and then I also see some of that planar analysis, which is a close cousin to the cross contour thing that we gave part of a day to, right? And then line weight. I mean, that's a lighter line there, heavier line here. So just in, you know, a few days, we've got a bunch of line stuff that gives us a way to talk about a lot of things that are three-dimensional. And of course, this plane stuff can actually be telling about light and shadow before you've even done any light and shadow, because oftentimes that sort of reveals the plane. Meaning, I might be doing a structural line drawing of one of these things, and I might be like doing some line work that sort of goes along with cast shadows, or sort of, you know, a shape that later could be the cast shadow. I think we saw this one before, right? Structural line drawing, in which the artist has probably done a lot of straight lines, a lot of light stuff, worked a lot of things out, but then also maybe even erased heavier lines on top of that. Negative spaces in there, negative spaces looked at closely. So a little contour line drawing here. When you're doing this, you don't have to do everything, it seems, because you don't have to shade it, but you have to get your contours really correct, or it will look awkward. Your duck might still look okay if your contours are a little funny, but on some of these other objects, maybe they will look wonky or a little awkward. Did anybody find, incidentally, because I don't think I gave this any lip service yet, did anybody find that when you were doing contour, particularly early on, in which things looked like this, you know, a backpack, a shoe or something, did anyone find that, wow, this is great because my drawing looks really beautiful, even though it's got lots of funky, not completely accurate, like there's things about the object I'm drawing that I know are off, but it doesn't look troublesome, or it doesn't look, did anybody find that? Well, there's actually a quality that happens, I think, in certain kinds of, maybe I'll have an example in here, I'll point out what I'm talking about, but you can have line work, and you can be sort of, I think that's less that way when you're working like structural lines, you know. I don't think there's any sort of like endearing quality to your lines if they're wrong. You know, if this drawing is just off, you may not get anything like that going on. But I bet if I went back and looked at your shoe drawings and your sketchbooks and your backpacks, I could probably point out a lot of examples of what I'm talking about, in which it's like, well, that's not correct, you know, per se over there, but it's still lovely to look at. When you're working this way, you know, it's almost like just math. It's like you're doing geometry. It's like you're sort of, and that's why I brought up how we used to manually do mechanical drawing when I was lecturing that one day, um, long ago, when we had triangles and T-squares and things like that, and we worked at our drafting tables, and we would work this kind of stuff out manually. This was all replaced by computer programs uh, fairly rapidly when I look backward, but the same principles apply, and it's like you're just trying to learn how to do that with your eye, just like what we try to do with shape and value is kind of like trying to do with our eye what cameras do. The structural stuff can be very handy. We haven't done figures yet, but we will. And so you can see that this no fear of the stray line, kind of blocky, chunky, drawing through. Remember that? Draw through, in which well, I've got a line here, and that line is light, but it's to tell me how this relates to that. I'm not going to be stressing about the fact that there's a line on my paper that's not, you know what I mean? It's light, it's okay. I've got lots of them, but I'm going to talk about how this knee lines up with that knee, right? And I'm okay with putting that on my paper because I'm working this stuff out. Structure, 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 and then negative spaces. So I'm hoping that, now I'm hoping if you look at something like this and you look at something like that, you may, oh, nice line work, that's a boot. I'm hoping you also might pick up this shape that's in between this and that. Like, what is that? I hope you see it now. I hope that begins to happen sometimes, even when you're not specifically straining to make it happen. I hope you see some of the shapes formed in between things or by the holes of things, around things, because believe me, seeing this shape in here will be a lot easier than seeing precisely correctly these two legs on their own. Okay, so pure negative space example here. Here's that baby carriage in the back, right? Once again, here that one is. And so negative shapes were kind of our first time that we were explicitly told to look at shapes. And then we got on shape with a capital S, meaning, okay, line, we understand you thoroughly now. We know that you stand for an edge. We're aware of what we're looking at when we trace edges more than we might have been before. So then we go to shapes, and well, shape of what? And since we're not working in full color, it becomes value, which value is one of the three properties of color. Okay, you don't have to know that necessarily, but color has got three properties: hue, value, and intensity. Okay, so if you take the other two away and you just got value, you've got a lot. You've got a lot. Maybe this thing that I showed you once before, this grayscale, could mean more to us now because we've been trying to make grays with our charcoal and our paper towel and our, we've been trying to see what the overall shade of gray would be that is right for any particular area. And maybe now looking at how, nice little tricks about optical effects like simultaneous contrast. For example, this is the same gray over here as it is over here, but it looks darker here, lighter there, because of what's next to it. Color is the same way. It interacts. You can make them look more intense or weaker, or there's all kinds of things that happen depending upon what's next to what, right? So if we had maybe we had a dark backdrop and we experienced the kind of thing in which something that we thought of as, because we just give them names, right? We'll just say like, well, that's gray and that's it. Or we'll say, well, that picture is white and that's it, and so forth. But maybe we had some objects that because of what was next to them, around them, we encountered some of these kinds of effects. I hope you did. I hope you had some things that almost disappeared sometimes, like those edges were hard to see because values were similar. And I hope you had some things that you might have thought were really similar in value actually become more distinct. What am I talking about? Well, when the Mullins, you have, I would just call your hair dark, and I would call your t-shirt dark, and I would say, well, but the room is burgundy or whatever. But now where I'm looking, it's like there's a part where your hair is fading into the burgundy wall behind you, right? And start observing those kinds of things. And I understand the reason it looks that way is because the values get similar, okay? Um, and we got into that kind of stuff where we tried to make things that were opaque, look opaque, things that were see-through, look see-through, things that were shiny, look shiny. How do I draw something and make it look like plastic? How do I draw something and make it look like metal jewelry? The answer is always with shape and value. The value, though, as per our last lesson, actually counts more than the shape, which we don't want to believe. We feel really ripped away now from a few weeks ago where we were putting everything on the description of an edge. If I describe edges well with lines, then everything else we can sort of fill in. But when you look at this now, wait a minute, am I imagining it? I kind of am. Like I look at this and I'm satisfied with it as a diagrammatic drawing. But notice how the paper shows through everywhere. I mean, there's a little bit of sort of Tony stuff kind of there, but most of this it's suggested. If we get these angles correct and those lines correct, we'll do that. We'll fill it in. But once we get over here, right, it's like, oh yeah, right. This has got that information. Of course, it looks dramatic. It looks spotlit in the dark. Now here's a way to get a sticker, and it's not as hard as little babies with wings that are called putti in Renaissance paintings. By the way, this could end up being common knowledge though, because people are so into making funny memes out of Renaissance artworks and old artworks. Have you seen any of them going around on Instagram or anything? Sometimes I think I've got several of them, like, which crazy Renaissance baby are you today? So I wouldn't be surprised if that term didn't somehow make its way, because I've seen this happen a lot in my lifetime. I've seen terms that nobody ever heard of. All of a sudden, everybody's slinging it around because some popular culture thing has done that. If you can tell me the word, and I'll give you the first letter, if you can tell me the word, the fancy Italian arty word for dramatic light and shadow, like something coming out of the dark, that starts with a C, the art term for crazy dramatic lighting.
Is it chiaroscuro or something like that?
We have a sticker. We have a sticker. Now, of course, I don't expect anybody to be able to spell it, because then we'll mess it up, because it's chiaro, chiaroscuro. Yes, chiaroscuro, however you want to pronounce it. I'll make a little note here. Sticker, chiaroscuro. Okay, yeah. Basically, this drawing is in chiaroscuro. So if you see a Caravaggio painting and everything looks dark, but it looks like there's one like oil lamp or candle somewhere that's throwing light on, really bright light in a particular place, that's chiaroscuro. Maybe I'll get you some examples in the future but this is like chiaroscuro. So I've been telling you, well, let's just try to at least have a light to the side of something and get some cast shadows, but we did eraser drawings, right? We did subtractive drawings. This is one of them. This is an eraser drawing. Okay, we did these, which means this was toned and then erased away, and it's tough. I think one of the reasons that the eraser drawing can be such a good teacher about values is not only because it makes you subtract and work from dark to light, but also because it sort of, you have to work at it. It will not just make that many shades of value easily. you have to do it, right? You have to look hard and you have to see. And even here, I wouldn't say that this has like a zillions, you know what I mean? Like it's got like, uh, and who else? You can give me a thumbs up uh, indicator for this. Who found that the harder thing when you were working subtractively was to get satisfactory lights with the eraser drawing? Like you rubbed and you rubbed and you rubbed, but it's like, yeah, it still could go darker. I've still got like this paper and it's got a little bit of charcoal left in it and it could be lighter still, or I could put a lighter shape inside of what I've already done if it would let me. But I think I've erased it as far as I can. And I've even taken out the Conte crayon and I'll put a little bit of that on there, but it's still, you know, it's just hard. And that area, it's like easy to get middle gray. It's easy to get, you know, max dark, but it's to try to get 5, 6, or 7 values, you got to work at it, right? You'll get like 2 or 3 if you're not, you know, trying hard. Um, but this tells us everything about what's going on there. You know, short of being in full color, it shows us that these edges that could have been done in line are the edge between this value and that value, right? This value and that value. So there's a shape right there, right? So I developed my ability of like, you know, I make silly jokes sometimes, like you're the Terminator, you know, and you can zoom in and a little red sort of like a little thing kind of like isolates the shape and you can see it super clear. I think that's like what you're doing when you're doing like negative space work. You're like looking in and you're kind of like finding a shape and locking onto it all by itself. And if we take that into, you know, full color work like painting, we can, you know, we can show how colors can indicate plane, like the shift in the little change in the reds turns what makes this go around. You know, this is a painter who really does, you know, see the structural lines and the measuring sort of indicators that are still here left there, you know. So this is a very academic work, but that kind of stuff, you know, can be taken into subjects that seem just crazy difficult, like the human body, you know. So simple organic form, analyzed, cited, measured, you know, all that, and complicated or organic form. But same things being used to structural lines, variation in line weight. Of course, we know here this lovely line that goes along there, you know, stands for a difference we can see between the figure and the ground being over here. You know, so this could be replaced with a value here and a value there. There's a little bit of tone along here, but this is mostly structural line stuff, a little bit of value, but not a lot. And then I showed these at the end of a lecture before, didn't I? I show these student charcoal drawings? Yeah, thought so. Talking about how when you work the media and you rub it and you make all these shades of gray and you telling stories about how once you get in there, it's really easy to make everything look the same, and you know, you may have to go back and sort of like get the value range right for a particular object. Yeah, I remember doing that. I was talking about how like, well, if this is going to be leather and that's going to be metal and this is going to be enamel, like we can't have the same values on all of them. You have to show how, like, you know, and how that, as amazing as some of these may be, if we look at it from that vantage point, there's sort of an extra level of success, because this is a fantastic one, but it doesn't have as strong a feeling of things being made of different things as some of the others. You get the idea, right? So then we've gone quickly from line into shape and value, and we're trying to use all the values or get the values right. We've worked subtractively, we've worked in this other direction, because our experience has been taking something that darkens and always applying that to paper, you know, and leaving the paper showing through, and, you know, so we've actually turned that around. And hopefully we become better at seeing shapes because the shape is always there, right? If we have photographs and we take away all the midtones, which is easy to do with a filter. And there was a time in my life in which I would have these classes, many years. My classes would often be quite big, 20 some people in a drawing class or a figure drawing class. And of the 24 to 28 people that were in the room, depending on how much absenteeism I had, there were years that it seemed I almost always could find somebody wearing a t-shirt that had an example of this thing, which is if I was teaching the portrait, say, and somebody had a Che Guevara t-shirt on or something, I could say, hey, oh, everybody look at their t-shirt. And I could point out how, so all the midtones have been taken away, and this is to be made into a graphic because it's a silkscreen process, and they just want, you know, one ink and one shirt, you know, so they got a, so somebody has a, you know, one of these shirts and it's got, and we know immediately when we see it who's, because it's an iconic, famous image, right? And I would point out how, well, you know, look, if you take a photo and you crank the contrast and you get rid of all those midtones, there is nothing that looks like your expected idea of what a face looks like that's actually there. The shadows from the cheeks and the nose and all the shadows connect to the mouth, the nose, the eyes, those features, and anything can happen and you get all kinds of interesting, you know, crazy, sharp, you know, kinds of shadow shapes. And you cannot substitute your idea of what an eye or a nose or a mouth looks like, because that's not what it really looks like. And by taking away the midtones, we can see that. Everybody see that here? How we've got, like, if you were going to make a stencil, you would do this process, right? And I like to collect these kind of images as examples for that. This one is actually, I think, was just on the wall at Pamela's at Squirrel Hill. Like, you know, it's getting some breakfast. You know what I mean? I just saw it and I took a picture and I got a bunch of them because the odds have seemed to have gone down of somebody having a t-shirt on that is like this. But you get the idea, right? Next time you see somebody and they got a t-shirt of a famous person on it and it's been broken down into just two without any like transition values, just black and white, take a look and you'll find that it is like a chunky pattern, like two pieces of a puzzle that fit together of dark and light. And it has nothing to do with the symbols we use when we're cartooning a face, nothing. It has to do with the shadows that are formed by the topography of faces and light sources and things like that. And it can be just about anything. And this is why we got to stop doing portraits with stuff that we expect to be there, because that will be wrong. And we have to look at how shadow and light reveal the truth about something like a face and anything else. So after looking at a subject like the face and thinking that that's very difficult, we can look at something like this. I think I said Monday evening when I was doing the graphite value and pure value tone demonstration with graphite, drawing a groundhog or something, I was probably, at some point along the line, I probably said that you'll never have an easier time doing what I'm asking them when it's landscape. You know, it'll be hardest when it's like the human face. We've been doing still lives, and those are things that are closer to us, but you know, they're objects, so that's easier than people. But if we get out of our smaller spaces and see larger expanses, like when we did some drawing outside, but we didn't yet know how to use shape and value when we were drawing outside. We were doing scribbly, loose line compositions. But when you go out and it's big and you're far away and you're looking at mountains or you're looking at buildings or you're looking at any of these kind of things, it's much easier to generalize them. Okay, so there's a big part of review, is that general before the specific. And best tool, or one of the best tools, probably the best, but you know, well, what overall shape and what overall value, right? I need to do that with my eyes. I can't think about how snow, I might know that snow is made up of a lot of particles, but if I want to talk about what it looks like, I may need a big overall general, you know, and so houses are not unlike the cubes that we start with. Okay, there'll be a side that's in the light and a side that's catching shadow, yada, yada. So this has some light pencil work put down real quickly. So we could think of the structural lines lessons. And then it has solid shapes of value applied with ink wash. And we can expect that in our features. You know, so when we are doing some quick thumbnails of compositions and it's outdoors, like we might do in our sketchbook, you know, it really doesn't matter what media you've got. It might be good fun to you do oil, to do acrylic, to do watercolor, to do ink wash. But if you know, if you're looking at something like the great outdoors, areas of value that are quite simple, you'll find you can do that on evergreens and rocks and faraway hills and clouds and you know, distinctions between land mass and water. You'll find it much easier to do than on things that are small and close to us, or things that we assign a lot. We put so much meaning weight on people that we have a harder time doing this. So it can be good to practice this on people too. And maybe far away figures that we just don't have room to get too picky on can be a good idea. But in a way, to simply do exactly what has been done here on these pastoral scenes, you know, is the answer. There isn't a separate set of rules for landscape versus figure necessarily. We have to be able to see the overall shape of things, see the overall value of things, and go from there. And of course, that can be moved into working with color. It's not a big stretch to go from seeing, you know, black and white studies like this to seeing things like that. But then once I pull something up and it's got tons of detail in it, it just seems like, oh my gosh, you know, it can't be, and we might forget. But go back to general before the specific, big stuff before small. Now, you know what's really great? What's really great? What's really great, you know, besides chocolate and bacon or whatever, you know, what's really great is when things that are very much tutorial, how-to, learning basics, fundamentals, because most of the examples that I've shown here are the sort of thing that can be easily, they're really easily found. There's an abundance of them. You know, this doesn't tend to exist in the world. Well, still lives are everywhere, but I mean like something that's set up for the purpose of making a drawing like this. We kind of know it when we see it. There might be a corner of your garage that looks like that, and you could just crop it and compose it and draw it, which I encourage you to do things like that. But for the most part, when we see something like that, we know, oh, there's that kind of thing you set up because you're learning to draw. And we certainly know, oh, there's that kind of drawing you do because you're trying to learn how to do the negative spaces. Oh yeah, there's an academic structural analysis from a still life, right? Like we know it when we see it. We know that these are, I think I said before, you can put like contour line or line weight variation. You know, there's these terms that I use in the first half of drawing one. You can put them in a search engine and you will find the exact kind of thing. You get some other crap too, but you'll be like, yep, there's one. Oh, sure enough, shoes, or handbags or whatever, and things like that. It's very, very objective. It's very it's finite. But what's cool is, well, then I want to make art, right? Okay. And what's interesting is when examples of those kinds of things are very apparent in, some recognized contemporary artists' work, and you can still point that out. What am I talking about? Well, I mean, it used to be long, long time ago, because it is a long, long time ago. A lot of the things that people really like and admire are 100 years old at least when it comes to art. What am I talking about? Well, a lot of people don't really care that much for 20th century art because it went abstract, and a lot of people don't care for what happened after that because they're not into the, they feel sort of like, what, I'm confused. So, conceptual art, a lot of things don't have an emphasis on skills in the academic or classical sense, right? So, and that stuff is in galleries and museums. It's not on TV, or you know what I mean. You don't just hit the corner. If you do come across something on the corner, I mean, maybe you went by a mural, right? And the mural will usually be community focused, right? Or maybe you went to a place and it's like, oh, is they're selling art, and they have prints of all kinds of things that have been mass produced, tons of times. But when they go into the contemporary art museum, a lot of people are like, whoa, well, I like this, but then that's confusing. It's crazy, right? But people are very comfortable with impressionism, say. But if there's not too many other things where you can just stay in France in 1870 and sort of feel like you're being up to date, right? And a lot of I won't get too far deep in this, but a lot of contemporary art examples do not feature academic skills necessarily. Okay, just take my word on that. There's a lot of contemporary art where it is not being looked at or considered or recognized because, its maker is like the best drawer, right? Or something like that. It might be, but just know that that's not the sole reason that it might be sort of being looked at. And that's been for quite a long time now. I can't give a whole 19th and 20th century art lesson, but hopefully you've got some idea of what I'm talking about if you've ever gone to a contemporary. I won't say modern, because modernism is basically something that begins concurrent, like modernism kind of begins with post-impressionism and is more, I associate modernism more with like the mid 20th century, say. But here's an artist who's not dead, okay? They're not long gone. They're around now, and I think they do performances and other things, but these drawings have, by Chloe Pine, P-I-E-N-E, are incredible line weight drawings, right? Whatever else they are, if they're about feminism, if it's about death, if they're about like whatever else their content is, write that word down, content. They also make me care because that is line weight. Like I can pull these out in a foundations class. I can show these as examples of line weight, the same as I could a drawing of a still life or a shoe or any of those things that is, completely perfunctory. Are you with me? Am I making sense? Good. That's really great because I'm not going to ask you to solve all the problems of what it means to be an artist in the 21st century. I'm not going to do that. Okay. That's something to give, years of your life or your lifetime to. But I am going to give you the simple question that you can write down, which is to ask yourself, and you don't have to answer it immediately right now. You just have to ask it, which is, if I could draw to my satisfaction, if I could draw well, if I got really good at blank, 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 some aspect of drawing, what would I do with it? Now, of course, that may be as simple as like, well, if I can draw stuff and make it look really real, I'm going to impress my friends and family, you know, or I'm going to do a magnificent portrait of my Labrador Retriever. Just don't know where I got that idea to say that as an example, but we may have goals that are no more, you know, ambitious than simply being able to do this stuff, right? And so and there are plenty of artists out there that's what it's all about. It's like, look how well I can do these really old tropes, meaning landscapes, still lifes, figures. I can do those really well, but they may still be doing basically studies, right? When you look at the work, the purpose that the work exists is to study the human body, or is to study light and shadow, or to, you know what I mean? It's not because the setup of, I mean, none of these, I think you can agree, none of these are about, you know, is this, wait a minute, no, Mullins, that shoe is a symbol. This is about electricity because I see a cord up there, and this is about, no, no. We know that this is a bunch of things that have been set up to draw and to study form and to, you know, like, so this is not an allegory. Now, maybe 300 years ago, you might see a still life that had all kinds of symbolic meaning. It was an allegory. But we know when we look at these that we're not supposed to interpret them, or, you know, we know that they are made. And let me get that one figure. Like, for example, this is not. Now, maybe I could change one or two things and I could have this be about aging. Maybe I could change one or two things and I could have this be about, you know what I mean? Like maybe something about the gut, or, you know, maybe there's a way, and then there is, believe me, I know there's a way that I could adjust this drawing a little bit, and some things that I could do, and we might actually end to have a conversation about sexuality, or about the corporeal, the body, some of these topics. But as it is, we're probably going to look at this and know that, oh, life drawing, you know, it's figure drawing. It's the class where you draw, you know, people, because you're getting, you know, and it's for drawing better. Okay. I wouldn't say that these, you know, are turning into really super content laden things right away. They're pleasant. It's nice to imagine these settings or whatever, but I think they are also for study. But then notice how this starts getting a little bit, you know, now it's not, you know, this isn't really like, I wouldn't say there's a ton of layers of meaning here. I often got, you know, the skeleton comes out in foundations drawing classes too, and we draw it, right? Do we make deep meditations about mortality? I think we mostly just describe bones, if you know what I'm saying, right? So I'm not telling you you have to come up with amazing concepts, although some of you might. I'm simply going to give you a thing to think about. The first one is, well, if my skills are high, because I took a class that works on that, what would I apply them to, right? And the next thing I would say would be, here's the assignment. The assignment is to make a drawing of your own conception that deals with space and place, which is going to give you plenty of guideline, and at the same time be quite open. All right, I'll elaborate. I'll carry on. So another thing that I like to kind of collect, or I'll never tire of seeing, is images of artists in the places where things happen, the workspaces. Now, the word that's used most of the time, you know, studio, right? The artist in the studio. And of course, if you look at things that are 200 years old, you may see somebody, you know, they got an easel, like you see certain types of images. And then that's much more all over the map lately. My folder of images of artists in their studio vary widely. They don't all look the same. They might say, well, no, it's all pictures of people in rooms with junk and they're making a mess, you know, and well, perhaps, but some of them are quite spare. Some of them are very cluttered. Some of them are, you know, making paintings. Some people have like a laptop, you know, it just depends on what kind of media that they're working in and what they're doing. But here is Louise Bourgeois sitting at a table in her house that was in the Village in New York, and she lived in it forever. I mean, she lived a very long time. I don't think she hit 100, but she had been in this house since the mid 20th century or the 40s or something. I don't know. It's been a long time, and the house itself is you know, a thing of you know, it's almost like a myth. It's, you know, if you Google Louise Bourgeois, you probably find some imagery of the interior, just like you might if you do. There's so many images of Andy Warhol that that wouldn't necessarily be, because there's so many things that could come up. But Andy Warhol also was an artist that you guys have heard about that, right? Like when he passed, how long, like there was so much stuff. Like he went shopping every day and they had to extract so many things from the space or whatever. And sometimes that happens where they'll keep it, like, you know, turn it into a museum or something. Like now, of course, if you go over to France, you can go into hey, I went into Delacroix, went to the studio of Monet, you know, or things like that. It's almost tourism. Well, it is tourism, you know. They moved Francis Bacon's studio and recreated it perfectly, which is amazing because it was like a massive mess, just stuff everywhere. But they itemized everything and they moved it and so forth. But I'm not talking about just fetishizing the stuff. But I am talking about like a consideration of where we dwell, where we work, you know, your workspace, your like place, like, for example, this is probably a lot more like, you know, people can relate to this probably a lot more because now maybe some of my students have transformed spaces to where it's like, you know, I'm a working artist, I'm a professional artist. I've got like this whole, I got room where there's an easel and I got room where, you know, and I put stuff up all over the walls and I kind of, you know, a studio. But most of the time it's like, well, I've got a corner, Mullins, I've got like a desk. I've got like, you know, and so this is something that's really on my mind because in March, all of us, you know, so often in talking about art, it seems like I'm talking about something that's like, you know, okay, people that are into that kind of thing. And then there's you know, but we've all been in the pandemic, right? And I'm very interested in things that is shared or shared. And I'm really interested in like the forms that these things can take. And one of my jobs in working with you is to let you know how there are interesting visual experiences and stuff everywhere. So in March, we told everybody to, hey, go home and stay there, shelter in place, and we got to flatten this curve and all that. And well, if we can't come into the shared studio to do, well, you know, hey, another professor said, well, draw your home workspace, right? And people did, and some of them were pretty darn cool, you know. And many of them were filled with the same kinds of things, a lot of banal and mundane things or so forth. But yeah, how about that? So everybody check this out. This is a drawing made by somebody in drawing for non-majors last fall. That's one amazing eyebrow raise I got there on you, Henry. That's an eyebrow raise. Do you like the drawing? What do you think? Huh? Okay, well, I got some thumbs up there. So this student who took drawing for non-majors, this was not the assignment because this was of course, this was pre-pandemic and sort of, but it's the case that everybody that people spend a lot of time at their desks studying and looking at the screens and meeting deadlines and doing papers, answering email and watching YouTube videos of cats or whatever it is. There are these places where our lives, like what portion of our lives, it's a significant portion, right? And I think sometimes we love these spaces and other times it's just matter of fact, or maybe we starts off as matter of fact, but we try to do things to kind of make them I don't know, but do you remember talking in the sketchbook presentation? I talked about how I see a lot of those. I asked if other people did it. Those surrogate selves, those little stand-ins for ourselves that people do. Remember that? Well, that's actually what's going on here. The assignment was not the same. I did not say I want to see space. I did not say I want to see where you work. I did not say I want you to draw a special place. It was something else. Okay. It was probably that it had to be a figure and it had to be blah, 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 blah. It was probably something like that. Matter of fact, I know it was. But this great example for this project came out of what the student wanted to do anyway. Okay, so you have to come up with an idea. And that idea may be really simple, or it may seem like it's complex, or maybe whatever, but you have to figure out what it is you're going to draw, okay? Or how we are going to see it as a viewer. But this artist said that they kind of had this, I don't think it was any big deal. I think it was more of a kind of like the kind of thoughts that we just have thoughts, we have, it's only when I throw out a homework assignment that then it's like, you know what, I'm going to take these thoughts that I have and I'm going to bring them to life in an artwork. But it was like, yeah, this sort of like imaginary people that help me kind of idea going on, like little Apple people that like, and I think it was probably influenced or, coming out of other things, because we've all seen things in popular culture. We've all seen things in consumer arts that we kind of think are cool or would be cool, and we kind of adapt our own little kind of things like that. But I said, sounds great. Let's draw it, So with some reference photos taken of themselves and their little corner of the world where they work, and then the addition of some invented elements, which is the little, probably influenced by animation, I'm guessing, kind of characters, this drawing came. And then of course, like value and ray, all this stuff, because that's the thing, is like try to somehow draw upon, it's a pun, I guess, but draw upon the teachings of the class and use them somehow to enact one of your ideas or one of your visions that is a response to the prompt of the drawing needs to be about space, or the drawing needs to be about place, right? So there's a lot of different ways this could go. Same artist from that class did a drawing earlier in the semester that, you know, I don't even remember exactly what it was about, but they had a salmon, and this is campus. You know, I forget which building they were looking out of, but they had this, like, you know, like it gave them a giggle or it gave them a kick or whatever, but they, you know, they had simply combined the salmon and the view of the campus. And so this is, yeah, so this is, you know, I suppose we could say, how do you know it's a professional artist? Because the reproductions are a lot better, right? It doesn't look like a phone picture taken by Mullins of somebody's drawing. It looks better than that. So Paged Young Moon here makes work that I think would certainly fit into this notion. And, you know, these aren't, because I got a couple more, these aren't like displaying, look how real I can make stuff, so much as they're showing, look how earnestly or sincerely, look how much I love making drawings, and look how I will put all these little things into it, you know, to sort of share with the viewer, because I feel like it's letting the viewer look into, you know, the daily world of somebody who loves to sit at their table and make things. But see the Trader Joe's bag and the slippers and the, like, all these little sort of, like, you know, and I point that out because I know many of you will be thinking that the sole merits of this drawing will be how real it looks. And you're thinking like, well, I'm not a master at making things look real. But you should already be thinking about, well, what is that the only thing you can do? You know, is be the, you know, be the top skills person, or is there something else? You know, and there's a lot of something else, actually. For example, in these drawings, it's not perspective, you know, done better than anybody else in the world that we're appreciating. Matter of fact, the perspective is off. The space is not perfect. The viewer in this case is a giant who is looking down into a dollhouse with the roof removed or something, or, you know what I mean? Like, that's not a real vantage point that I can have unless I'm somehow up in the rafters. And even then, there's a little bit of a naivety or childlike sort of quality, but I want you to think about form, and I want you to think about content. Okay, so content is what something is about, right? Subject matter is what's dealt with. Imagery is what's pictured or depicted. But your content should determine your form. Okay, so you're going to make form because you're going to make some visual vocabulary. But I want you to think about your content first. Don't go looking for an image and then think, oh, I'll draw that, and then it'll mean this. Rather, think about what you want to talk about first and then go looking for your reference images. Please remember that, okay? Because your result will be better if your content is a result of you considering, or if your form is a result of you considering your content, right? So I think the memory of a trip to the beach probably comes first, rather than drawing images of, you know what I mean, and then expecting that to kind of, you know. So if you're making autobiographical work, you know, you sort of just get the horse and the cart in the right order, please. By the way, I hope nobody is we're not doing this now, right? Unless we're being irresponsible, right? Now there's room for invention in this. Okay, this is another artist that, you know, maybe literally your backyard has these things strewn around in it, and you go into your backyard in your pantyhose. Maybe that's literally, you know, but it may also be that there's a little bit of allegory or a little bit of symbolism or a little bit of the fantastic or a little bit of kind of thing. And that is, there's completely room for that. You might think about an ideal space. You might think about an imagined place. You might critique yourself and let that, which I think is what the artist here does. You might allow certain things to come out because you're thinking about things, but you're not restricted to only dealing with them literally. Okay. And I always sort of like slam being literal, because I think that can be kind of like the antithesis to art. You know, when you think like the only kind of way to approach something, you know, is in the most kind of, you know, well, this means this and this means that, and everybody knows it, and we're done. And you know what I mean? Like that, I don't think that's being very particularly artistic. But you might, I mean, you could just give me a very fine drawing of your workspace. I would say that's what this slide is, you know, and we could critique it in terms of, by the way, I think this is digital. Don't do that. I want you to work on paper. Okay. I'll talk more about media in a minute, but, you know, if you draw well, you may have, you know, you don't have any fancy, you know, super clever kinds of things that you've cooked up, you've just given, you know, that might actually work really well. Okay, so don't get the wrong idea that I'm thinking you have to invent an entire world somehow. Not necessarily. Maybe, if that's your inclination, there's room for both. So here's an image from that class that this was produced in. And we were doing big drawings. So, because there's no need to be afraid of it. Now I know, of course, we have restrictions upon ourselves potentially now because of, you know what I mean? Like, although I think doing this, maybe not so close to each other, but doing that is a more viable thing, you know, than doing this, probably. But, you know, I simply told the group to bring in lots of 2D reproductions, printouts, photos, what have you, of stuff that they thought was of interest. And we were just, I showed a certain method, which I cannot do with you now. It involved, we actually had these long sticks and we drew with these long sticks to get our drawing started. But if you are inclined to work big, please go right ahead. Okay. If you are confronting yourself with another one of my questions that I would ask you to write down, which is, what are you going to do to make your drawing good? Because Mullins has said, like, well, you could draw it really, really well, and it could be very realistic and convincing and academic and perfect and those kinds of things, and that's good. But is that the only thing that you could or might, you know, is that it? So I simply have to be super skilled, and that's, well, it's great if you feature skill in your drawing, but there's other things, like, for example, scale. Now, of course, can you do a big drawing and it's still very weak? Absolutely. Can you do a small drawing and it's very strong? Absolutely. Can you work on something forever and it's going to be good? Is that guaranteed? That sucks, man. That's not fair. Can somebody do something fast and it comes out really well? That's not fair either, right? Oh man. Have you ever known somebody that, like, you know, some subject, they don't study at all and they get a really good grade in that subject, and you have to study, but you still don't get as good a grade as that person who didn't? That's really unfair, isn't it? Yeah. Ask yourself, how am I going to make my drawing strong? So what that really is kind of like thinking about how you will approach the form. By the way, here's a detail of a cat from one of those big drawings. maybe, because this drawing is not, this is an 18 by 24 drawing. It's really elaborate though, right? It's got a lot invested into it. But when I look at this, I might think about how long it would take to do that. As your professor, I actually don't think, you know, in the big picture, that has to do with what you're used to. Okay, if you've never done anything, then you look at that and go, "Oh my God, that would take forever." But you know, that's all. Trust me. Um, I had a daily commute in the Bay Area, and I'm fully aware that most people living elsewhere in our nation, my father included, would have considered that to simply be unacceptable, crazy, outrageous. Not, you know what I'm saying? Like every day I would do something going to and from work that he was not used to, and he would not see how it was possible. And do you see what I'm getting at? Right? It has to do with what we think we're used to. So if you've done a lot of drawing, you have a different sort of like metric about like what, you know, how long, how big, you know, that kind of stuff. That all is about what you're used to. All right. So if you haven't done something before, doesn't mean it's not possible. It means you haven't done it before. Or if you haven't spent, I mean, you've probably already, just through my class, done some things that, like, you know, well, you hadn't done that before, right? And so you might find that, like, well, if I simply get into the habit of working on something multiple sessions, putting it away and so forth, you know, that could actually be fun, maybe. Most of my students have played video games for periods of time that I never did, although I racked up some hours in the Atari generation. But you know what I mean, the whole thing of like having something ongoing and going online and saving it and sort of, you know what I mean, people like do stuff. It's like I never did that, right? But if you're used to it, you're used to it. And that's really what should be thought about. Like, you know, you probably spend, how much time did you spend working on some darn paper? You know, and that was one of the things that was really great about doing these large drawings, is that they actually, while at first it was like, you know, I'm pulling out paper and cutting off pieces of paper that are like 30 some inches, you know, or 40 inches or whatever. And people at first, their eyes are getting big and they're going, "Oh no." You know, one of the things that was to be learned from this is that if you approach it a certain way, it might even go faster. And it did, actually. A lot of folks had these farther along in shorter amounts of time than some of the things we've been doing at our desks. Because of how we approached it, we used charcoal, we filled spaces quickly, we did, you know, certain things like that. If I give you a small brush, like we would use for art, and tell you to paint my house, you know, that's going to take forever. But if I give you a roller and tell you to paint a room in my house, you may roll it up, you know, really quick. It simply has to do with what you're doing and how you're going about it and that kind of stuff. So don't be afraid about scale if you would like to get a little bigger. Sometimes people are freed by it. Sometimes they actually feel better, instead of it being like, "Oh my God, I'm committing to so much more, and it's going to take." Well, if you handle it the same way and you go along, you know, specific to specific to specific to specific, and you never do general, and you never, well, yeah, it might take you forever. But if you mass in things big and you got a big stick of something and you're, you know what I mean, you might find that you're working faster than you ever did. And this really is the case with painting too. This drawing was autobiographical. It was a personal narrative. It was, you know, a story was told by its maker. Everybody has thoughts and ideas. Sometimes I'll get this, "Well, I don't have any ideas, Mullins," which I always think is really bizarre and funny, because it's usually somebody that before class started was talking to somebody else, and I overheard them give an opinion and retell an event, you know, and like I heard them like throw out like a bunch of ideas. Like they told me, like I overheard them saying to somebody else what they thought about something. I heard them evaluate something. I heard them tell a story that they thought was tragic or funny. You know, it's like, it's simply a matter of like monitoring your thoughts, I think, and catching them, which you again, is another habit that we might be used to or we might not be in. But again, don't think you have to do something that's really, really, high-minded or whatever. There may be something that's simple. I hope everybody is watching me right now. I can't tell who all is watching me because, not everybody's got their video on. But I always tell people that this is the range in ideas. Okay? So it exists. But this is the range in your ideas, my ideas, their ideas. My ideas may be a little bit better than yours, but it's still like, the difference between your ideas and your ideas and your ideas and your ideas and their ideas, here it is, right? Here is how we enact them, right? Let me get my arms way off both sides of the screen. It's important to remember that because we kind of live often in a culture of, if I just have my brilliant idea, then I got this shit. Like we're trained to kind of think that way. Like if I just dream up this app that everybody's going to use, then I'm going to be a millionaire. There's this kind of like thing that's going around about that. And the fact is that if I have the best idea in the world, like a really smart idea, like it's not only right, but it's innovative and it's brilliant. And it's like, let's say that somehow I managed to do that, which I don't recommend that you particularly try to dream up. I'd rather you actually like work at what you do and develop stuff, because that's actually where things, you may have heard some version of this from people coming from dramatically different walks of life. But do not wait for a eureka moment. Whenever I give you an assignment or anybody gives you something and it's productions, it's not just like, write an opinion piece or give me the right answers or that kind of thing. It's like you have to come up with something. Anytime you have to come up with something, don't wait to be jolted from your bed at midnight, divinely having this amazing idea, because that probably won't come. Rather, start putting some ideas down into notes and kicking them around and thinking about how what that would look like, and develop one of them. Because if I have that idea that I was just saying I had, that is so brilliant and so innovative and so smart and so all of that, but I reach the podium and my vocabulary is on a third grade level, I will convince none of you that I have a good idea and that I am smart and innovative and all that kind of stuff. Conversely, if I have an idea that is pedestrian or even dumb, and I reach that podium before you and I am eloquent, articulate, persuasive, and those things you will probably come away thinking it sounded like a good idea. Everybody follow? Because what you're doing is you're going to that podium figuratively, not literally, but you're going to that podium and you're going to present some visual vocabulary, okay, which will either persuade us or not. The idea alone, you need it, but I've seen some dumb ideas look pretty darn good because of how they were carried out. And I've seen some good ideas fall on their face. Like I can recognize that there was smart thinking behind it, but the handling of the form, the visual vocabulary, was not working, right? And you too have seen this. You've probably seen it in more motion pictures or moving images on the TV or whatever, in which you've been like, that didn't work. That was not good. I went and saw that film. Well, this is older ways of doing stuff with a still image, right? We're going to make one image probably, and it's going to be still. It's going to be on a piece of paper. It's not going to move, right? We live in a world of, moving pictures that, so we're using an old technology, which is to hand make a single image, right? So that's kind of hard because we have to feel that we have to compete with all this other stuff. And that's why we get things that are often quite cliche, because we've seen so many images. How many images do you see a day scrolling through a phone or something? It's a lot, isn't it? Well, we thought it was a lot when I was young, and all we had was three channels on the TV. but people were talking about that then, that we were image saturated, and that was what was making it hard for us to make good art. And all, you know, there was a child's play compared to now. And if we wait another 5 or 10 years, we'll be in virtual reality all the time, and you know what I mean. So again, I would say go to what has always made good drawings, and don't just think like the night, if I use the right idea the night before, it'll be good, you know. And of course, if I thoughtlessly, with no idea, make a drawing, I'm apt to get something that is just a study, right? So these are good drawings, but they don't work as examples for the homework, because the only idea in them is to set up these things to look at and to study three-dimensional objects in space and reflect that back to the viewer. Whereas once we get over here, we find ourselves looking into somebody's world a little bit. So while this drawing does not model things in 3 dimensions and turn things into, you know, this model does not function as the ultimate example study-wise, it does so much more because the artist has shared with us, and we knowing that it was made by an individual by hand, we sort of look and like, it actually makes me feel a little bit. Do you empathize a little bit with the person hunched over the table, even though we don't see their face? The viewer kind of does, right? Like you feel like you're voyeuristically looking into somebody's life. Maybe they're an introvert, they like art, right? It's got all these kind of things in it. So one thing you can do besides draw extremely well is, well, what do you include? What do you share? How much of yourself do you put in it? How long do you work on the drawing? If you want to use color, you can, you're not required to. But if that is going to make it more fun and interesting for you, you can. Now, if you only put in color for the sake of color, it may not add anything to the drawing. It may look like you put color on it to try to make it better, and that's all, and it didn't even really, you know what I mean? That happens. We could look at the drawing and we could sort of see, just like you guys see when you watch films and you watch TV shows, you're like, well, I can see what they're doing there, but they're not fooling me, you know? But if you simply put color on, you know, or if you do it big, because, well, if I do that, it'll, you know what I mean? It might not, it doesn't guarantee anything. But if you make it with loving care, and I hope you know what I mean by loving care, that will come through. Here's another drawing. This was somebody, I think they were an engineering student, who they obviously were into what they were doing. And this assignment was we've got a collage project that we'll do in the future. This was for the collage project. It wasn't for space or place or anything, but I like it as an example for this because it's got this interior of a diner, which has like, check this out. Look how many stools there are in the diner. And there's just all this elaborate kind of stuff going on. It's kind of weird, but it's also just, it's a feast of drawing itself, kind of. You know, like I kind of like look at this drawing and I'm like, wow, you know, because the artist has just enjoyed making the drawing so much and putting in all this kind of stuff, you know. So, questions for yourself. Well, at the bare minimum, I could just, you know, like if I don't know what else to do, well, draw your workspace, right? So you'll never be completely lost in this assignment. It's not that kind of assignment where I always call my first one and my first critique, I always call them, you know, art light, critique light, meaning they're like, there's always some kind of like the prompt that I give is enough of a framework that if you just add something of yourself to it, you'll probably be okay, you know? Or if you just sort of like follow, like, you know, because I know that you all have a place. Now, somebody might be like, well, I want to envision my ideal place. I want to make a place that I wish I existed in and show everybody what that would look like. And that would be fun for me to envision, and then I think it would be interesting to others. Somebody else might be like, well, I don't have anything like that, but I'm going to draw the heck out of the room where I always am. And I'm going to put this kind of processed food, somewhere that I always eat in there. And I'm going to, you know what I mean? Like I'm going to put like things in there that, it might end up being a little bit funny, or it might be ending a little bit cute, or it might be, somebody else might say, well, it doesn't say it has to be an interior. I'm going to do a space that's outside. My space is, you know, uh, is these trails up in these hills, that's where I do my best thinking, Mullins, and I'm going to draw. You see what I'm getting at? And I'm not going to come back and be like, well, you made a landscape, it had to be an interior. I'm not going to do that. We're going to talk about, well, how did you carry out that idea, right? Now, I'll tell you something about examples. It's always good to show examples, but they're a double-edged sword because they only cover so much. And I always worry about the sort of like people watching and go, oh, we'll pick one of those and do something like one of those. I always worry about that because yours isn't here, right? You've got to make some examples for me to include in the future. What will it be about your drawing that makes it an example? Is it going to be because you did something that I don't see somebody do every semester? That could be it. You might do something that is kind of like what I see all the time, but it's incredibly well drawn, so it's a good example, right? But that other category is actually, that can be what's most satisfying is when I get both. Is when I would say the drawing is good, but then it's also like, well, I don't see that all the time in response to this, and it's like that's really interesting, right? It's a clever take on. It's like, well, okay, space, and so if you just do some thinking, I know you've got stuff. We're all different. We're all sort of like, so while we're sharing this experience of spending a lot of time in particular spots because of the pandemic or whatever, these drawings should not all come out the same. So spend some time thinking about it. Don't feel like if it's not, if you're not completely mimicking one of the examples that I had in the lecture, then that doesn't, no. Think about it first. Spend some time in the conceiving part and write some ideas down. Whatever you do, don't just go looking for another image and then say, well, I'll do that image, because then you're not having an idea at all except to like duplicate an image. Okay, think about like what you have, your thoughts first, and then let your thoughts drive the choices you make for what kind of references you get, what kind of images you need to help you draw this, what you're going to look at to carry this out. You might have a bunch of ideas. You might think they're all kind of lame, but please remember what I said about the variation, because what's really going to make the difference is how you carry it out. So that means budget your time. A few days of thinking about what you want to do. But at some point, well, then now I have to start like sketching and planning and getting my reference images. And of course, I know this is one of the great things we've got right now nowadays is there's no such thing as I couldn't find any images. If you tell me that nowadays, I'm like, what? You just didn't look too hard, because they're all there somewhere, right? And even if you can't get them off the internet because they're not exactly what you want, it's like now you can just take some pictures. You take some pictures and like, bam, you got 50 pictures that you just took, because, well, I got my roommate, or I got my partner, or I got whatever, because I needed some people posed doing this. And you just take the pictures and then you just shoot them into your, we used to have to do that with film, pay for the film, drop it off, get it developed. It came back. We paid for it to be developed, and then they're all washed out and yellow and no good, and start over. And you know what I mean? 2 weeks have gone by, and we used to have to go through that. Nowadays, we are able to kind of like, it's all out there. Okay. So we've got all the raw material we need. If we can conceive of it, we're not going to be like stopped by the limits of what's available to us, because everything is available to us. So if you can come up with it, well then you've got to allow the time to execute it, to draw the drawing, to make the drawing, which I recommend multiple sessions at least, you know, like, now I know this is like obvious for a teacher to say, don't just start your drawing and try to draw the whole thing the night before it's due. That will not be as good as if you know what I mean? Of course, of course. And as I said earlier, it's not fair, but there may be somebody who kind of does that, but they're really good at drawing and they pull it off. But I tell you, there still would have been a better drawing if that person had not. You know what I mean? Like whenever I look at somebody and they're able to pull something off really quickly the night before and it actually works, well, then what would I get if they worked on it over 2 weeks? That's what I always wonder, you know. So the working to your potential is different from person to person. And of course, we're going to come into critique and we're going to talk about these kinds of things. And that will be critique light too. That won't be like some intense, heavy critique, but we're going to bring these in and we're going to talk about them. And that's actually, I hope everybody is listening, that actually is really good news, because you can use that to kind of work back from to help you do this. What am I talking about? Well, if you keep questions that you should come to critique with in mind, write these down. What do I want viewers to think or feel when they look at this drawing? See, I could ask you that in critique, right? If you ask yourself that while you're creating the drawing, it will help it come out better. So yeah, write down some questions. What do I want my art to look like if I got really good at it? Just thinking that sometimes will give you some ideas about some things to make. What would I want my audience if it was somebody else's work? Because a lot of critique is about trying to learn how to do something that you can't do. Just like trying to make art is like, you can't do it, but you do it anyway, and then you see, you know what I mean? You're responding to the questions. So of course, I may not be able to do what I want to be able to do in 10 years, but this is my attempt now, you know, is often what is going on. We tend to look at people who are doing good work and we think, wow, they're there. The artists often think like, well, I'm still, this is my effort at this point in an ongoing process. But if you ask yourself, like, if this was somebody else's work, what would I think? You know, like, that's good for coming to critique. You know, so keep those questions in mind. I hope everybody's catching that. Now, one other thing. Most common mistakes. Have I got everybody's attention? Most common mistakes is probably top among them is a drawing that is too faint. Okay. Now, we don't have that thing. We don't have that thing where we're all going to come into a room, like into the studio, and pin these up with push pins on the wall, and then sit 20 feet back, or whatever. There would always be somebody, even when I warn of it like this, somebody then isn't listening or whatever. Then somebody does a pencil drawing and they think it's fine, but then they come into the room on the day of the critique and they pin it up. And when you're like 8 feet, 10 feet back, you can't even hardly see it, because they haven't used the full range of values, or they don't have enough contrast. And they're like, oh shit, you know. And it's like something that could simply be avoided, you know. So there's another thing that happens too, is like, oh, so I shot this. Graphite, remember me saying last night, it has a silvery quality. I think it actually like light will bounce off of it. Like there's a kind of a bit of a reflectiveness to it. This was a little darker than it looks in my phone picture, but the camera can handle this, whatever this work was next door that was put up over here. The camera's getting that, but it's actually showing me this graphite drawing. It makes it look a little bluer, and it makes it look lighter than it actually was. I'm not discouraging you from doing graphite at all, but whatever you do, get the full range of values. So that might mean rich darks. It might just mean making sure you have line weights that are heavy enough, because I'm not telling you how you have to work here. Because I always think to myself, there's always someone in the class who feels they have to do a charcoal drawing, or they have to do something, you know, and then it comes out in critique that like they wish they could have just done a line drawing because they feel better about that. But they, you know, there's always some things like that that are going, if you are best with a pen, see these things you got in your kit? Have you been into these yet? It's always everybody's favorite. Okay. If you feel like, my gosh, I am so new to charcoal, I am so new to shape and value, I'm so, you know what I mean? I feel like the best thing I've done so far this semester was a line drawing, and now I have to put everything into my drawing. Well, you might actually do a contour drawing and try to make it like, you know, an amazing contour drawing. So that's why I've got something like this right now, which is just a very generic kind of stock image, but it's a from an architectural source. And of course, its impetus was not to make art. It was just to sort of show a certain type of interior, right? But you might see how, like, well, what if you drew this way with the ink pens, right? You might, like, what is the way to go? Everything is a choice. The form is all a choice. So scale is a formal decision. Whether you do color or not, that's a formal decision. Whether you do this on a piece of paper or you, you know, prepare a piece of wood with acrylic gesso, and you, like, those are formal decisions. And composition is a formal decision. So I just want to make sure that you work in a way that is optimal for you, you know. So these don't have that kind of content. These are just studies, straightforward. Like, there's the outside, here's the inside, you know. But don't look at one of the examples and think like, well, I have to do, you know what I mean? Like, because there's a lot of different ways this could be approached. Now, if you do none of the things that we've learned in class at all, that could be an issue. But this is just a study of some boots. But I'm completely able to envision how somebody could do a drawing of an interior space and include all kinds of interesting elements in it, and it could have content, but it could be drawn this way with line and succeed. Am I making sense? Give me a thumbs up if I'm making sense, because I like it when I'm making sense. This could have been, you know, an ink drawing in line, right? And it probably wouldn't have been, you can see how, like, if some of this, if it wasn't for some of this, if you took it out, this is in danger of being too faint, actually. When your nose is really close to it, it doesn't seem like that. But when you back away from it, you know, it's like, please do that. Please look at your drawing from far away. Write that down. Like, make sure you have enough contrast. Make sure you look at what you're doing from far away. Because sometimes when we're hunkered down in our bedrooms and we're working on something, we'll think we know what the heck's going on, but we've never gotten any distance from it at all. We want to avoid that thing where you then bring it to critique. You know what I mean? Now, we won't literally be coming into a big studio and putting it up from far away, but we will be recontextualizing it by putting it, you know, you'll be sending it to me and I'll be putting it into a digital, you know what I mean? And everybody will look at all of the drawings together, which is very fun and exciting. And then we'll be talking about them. Okay. And I'll elaborate more on that, like, you know, because you have to be prepared to talk. Okay. But for now, think about the prompt and think about your ideas. And then when you got some ideas, get yourself excited about how you would carry out those ideas, right? And think about your strategies for what will make the drawing good and what will make it compelling and interesting and a good visual experience for others and things like that. And if you have questions, you know, tomorrow, the next day or whatever, you can ask me. You know, if you are having trouble along the way, you can ask me. That's always a little tricky because sometimes I don't like to spoil the surprise. Sometimes I think, because I really like coming in on critique day and seeing what people have done. And if it's really like, if they put a lot into it and it's really, you know what I mean? I think that, to me, that's always like a really exciting thing. And if I see it in progress, so be it, you know, and I'll help. But I do really love when I haven't seen something in progress, or somebody talked about the idea maybe with me or whatever, but then like they bring in something and they just like, you know, hit the ball out of the park or whatever. It's a great feeling. Um, so uh, remember what I said about ideas. Remember what I said about budgeting your time. Okay. Think about what you want to do. Okay. Questions. And if you get one of those, can it be this? Can it be that? Just ask yourself, well, is it dealing with, I'll make a little handout, and I'll send it to you and post it, Okay, so, let me check the chat that I couldn't see before. Okay, the critique is on the 12th. Right? So use those weekends. It's always good to take advantage of the weekends. And then I would say, don't expect to just, no, we're doing this drawing. We'll be critiquing this drawing that I'm talking about right now, that you will make on your own time. And yeah, you'll work on it a bunch of times between now and then. It's a homework project. It's not an in-class drawing assignment. It's a homework project. So you came up with the idea for it, and you made it. So that's not going to just happen in 2 hours. That's going to need to be given a little attention here, a little attention there, a little, what I mean, break it up, and spend a little time in the thinking stage, a little time in the planning stage, a little time in the getting reference stage, and then a good chunk of time in the drawing stage, right? Lovely. Anything else? It doesn't have to be an interior. It could still be an exterior. It just needs to be a dealing with place or space. Specifically, a space as it relates to you, a space that is important to you, a place where you work, or a place where things happen, right? And then thinking about the fact that you will bring it and you will talk about it would mean you can answer a lot of questions just that way, meaning well, what would I say about this? If you got an idea, it's like, well, what would my little artist statement be if I were to say, here's my work, and I were to introduce it to others and give them insight into it. And simply thinking about that will usually really help you, Like, always just imagine somebody like me is coming up to you and going, what's this about? Tell me about this, and that kind of stuff. And simply doing that, you may prefer to imagine it's a trusted friend that is asking you those things, but that can be most helpful, right? And then give yourself time to work on it, to play to your strengths, work in a way that you can see yourself succeeding. Sometimes people are like, oh, I want to use watercolor. It's like, well, great. Are you comfortable with watercolor? Do you think that is a good media to match to the idea that you have? Or, would it come out better, if you did it in pen and ink and you know what I'm saying? All of this is just about solving artist problems. Okay. So I'll do up a little handout just to reiterate the major things. And this video will get posted so it can be rewatched while you're working, or if you just need to fall asleep because you had too much caffeine, and I'm joking. By the way, rewatch the videos. That's what they're for. Okay, I'm going to make another one of last night's thing that didn't get, the value, kind of thing, I'll get something like that put up. But if time passes and you're still sort of like, oh, okay, the homework, and you want to just sort of, this one will be, those images and this lecture will be available to you. Okay. Well, great. I really look forward to what you do. If you need to show me what you're up to, consult with me, check in with me, by all means do it, okay? Is everybody just thinking, scheming, planning? Yeah? So, oh, I know what I want to draw. Oh, you know what would be cool? Is everybody doing that? Right? And they'll be amazing, right? They'll be earnest and sincere and lovely. Yeah? I can't wait. My spirit will be elevated, right? By these drawings. Just you wait, Mullins. Just you wait. Ah, there it is. There's a nice. Just you wait, Mullins. Just you wait. Okay, good. Think about it. Kick it around. Now, checking the schedule one more time. I will provide imagery on Monday. So you're in a good place here, actually, because you're finishing up. If you haven't sent it to me, you're finishing up a charcoal drawing. You just got to do some lineless studies in your sketchbook, right? You should be able to catch up if you've fallen behind. And then you just got to plan and scheme. Monday, I'll provide some stuff. I will provide things to look at for you to draw. And the sketchbook next week is open, you see, right? So we're coming into a good place. So give this homework project your undivided attention, all right? Fabulous. Can't wait to see them, all right? Have excellent weekends, and